Hello everyone, welcome to Dnyanadeep. UPSC Mains 2023 has just concluded and we are here with our analysis on various subjects. In this particular subject, we will be discussing GS paper 1. First, we will find what are the general observations regarding GS paper 1 and after that, I will be taking the geography part of that particular paper. So let us see some general observations in this particular paper. Now, GS paper 1, we know that there are three topics in GS paper 1, that is history, society and geography. Now, if you observe this particular paper, what do we find that I generally say that these days, at least in GS1, we find that GS is becoming optional. Fine. So you will find some questions in GS paper, typically in geography, which are sometimes aligned with the geography optional. That is the general trend for geography for past few years, 2-3 years. If you take geography questions, you will find the same trend. But now, increasingly, we have found this particular trend in other subjects as well. Now, let us analyze one by one each subject. Let's first talk about history. Now, for 2023 paper, history was mostly based on foundations, or what I will call it as basic knowledge. So whatever basic knowledge we have regarding ancient history, medieval history or even modern history, that fairly was sufficient to answer these particular questions. The challenge here was to recollect all these basics, because in last few years what has happened that we have started to neglect history as a subject, because return on investment in history is very low, and in that particular context we find that people are not even preparing the fundamentals or foundations of history. So I generally recommend you should be at least having a basic idea of ancient history, medieval history and modern history. You do not need to do a lot of PhD or don't need to dwell a lot of into that history, don't invest a lot of time, but don't skip the basic part as well. But because if you look at this year's questions and if you had basic idea of whatever topics were there in ancient, medieval and modern history, you would have been able to attempt these particular questions. Fine. So that is my understanding of this particular part. Now, even if I break this particular topic in, let's say, ancient, medieval, modern and world history, I'll go in a reverse order. If I look at world history, again return on investment was absolutely zero. If you look at the question which was asked in world history, most of you might not even be able to recollect this particular fact that there was a question on world history. That is sort of a vague question regarding railways. Now, in this particular case, we are observing for last few years that world history is unachievable. It is sort of unachievable. So again, there will be a tendency to neglect that particular topic. A lot of people are right now skipping world history altogether, but I generally do not suggest to do something like this. My simple approach will be, whatever basic things are there, fine, give a day or two, whatever basic notes you will find for world history, read those notes, and that should be sufficient. If you get the question or if you are able to write the answer, it's fine. Even if you are not able to write answer, even then it is fine. Spending one day on world history is not going to be a disaster. Fine. If you go for world history in detail, it may take an eternity, but that certainly we do not have that much of time. But that doesn't mean that you should altogether skip this particular part. Take a day or two, prepare whatever topics given in the syllabus, and you should be good with that. Don't bother whether there will be return on investment or not, because you haven't invested a lot of time. Coming to ancient, medieval and modern history, when it comes to this year's ancient and medieval, there were again fairly basic questions, right? If you are good with foundations or basic concepts, you would have been able to address this particular part well. When it comes to modern history, now modern history has a touch of a bit of analysis. You had to be a thinking animal, right? So again, whenever you are reading any topic, be a thinking animal. But typically in modern history, you need to be a thinking animal, and you need to analyze whatever events which have happened in modern history, and you need to relate it with contemporary times, contemporary issues, whatever we are facing, and you will get a slight clue from contemporary issues on what can be asked in modern history. So similarly, if you take a look at the question in modern history which was regarding nationalism, so similarly contemporary issue of nationalism is there, and there you have a clue for this particular area, right? So prepare fundamentals well. So whatever there is in spectrum or whatever foundation book you use, do that well, but analyze that particular part. So whatever ideas which existed in modern history, try to relate those ideas in present day and time, and that way you will be able to develop a better understanding, and you will be able to crack good number of questions from modern history, right? So that is my observation on history. Moving on to society. Society this year was a fairly tricky part, right? I'm not suggesting that there were like out of blue moon questions. Nothing was in that sense. But if you look at the question, these questions demanded application, right? Whatever you observe, whatever you witness in contemporary times in your surrounding on a day-to-day basis, you had to take theory of society and you had to apply that theory in these contemporary events. Take example of suicide of women. Take example of cuddling of child. Well, that is a classic question which you find all over around, and these are the questions which made this particular part of society a bit tricky, because knowing all those things is easy and giving a specific answer on all these things is fairly difficult. Fine. So that is again about society. Now moving to geography. When it comes to geography, there were two type of questions. One, basic questions, right? But what type of basic was asked? Very core geography type. Fine. So whatever basic questions were there, they were from core part of geography. Generally, geography optional students go through those core areas, or only those students have command over those core areas, and that is why it becomes very difficult to tackle. Another part or another variation, we find that there is a good amount of application which was required in this particular paper when it comes to geography. Fine. So again, approach should be what? Approach should be being thorough with fundamentals. Okay. So don't try to overdo this basic part or overdo this core area. If you are done with, or if you are good with NCERTs, fundamentals of physical geography and fundamentals of human geography, do these two NCERTs well and do GC Leong well. But what is the requirement here? Requirement here is you should be having a thorough understanding of each and every single concept which is given in these three books. At the same time, you should be thorough with each and every single concept which is given in the syllabus. If you are thorough with that, I'm sure that most of the questions we are doable in this particular part. Now we'll move on to next part regarding what was the scoring area in this particular paper. Fine. If I have to give you scoring area, again you could score well in geography because there were good number of straightforward questions, or there were good number of questions where you could provide at least some part of the answer. Fine. Also history, I'll find it was scoring this time, unlike every other time. If you look at the history question, and had you prepared well, now for history, that is very much required that basics should be prepared well. If your basics were all right, history was scoring. Now when it comes to society, there were obviously some vague questions, and to provide a very specific answer to those vague questions, it was very difficult. Fine. So again, society would not fetch you maybe that much of mark, but if you have done this particular area well, you should be able to score well. Now, what will be the average scores in this particular paper? So that's a futile exercise which I'll not do, right? So only after mark sheets are out, we will get to know what are the average scores. So let's not delve into that particular area, or let's not build up any idea on what should be ideally the score is. Now, having discussed all this part, we have addressed the nature of this year's paper. I have given you a rough idea. I have not presented you a detailed analysis on this particular part, but that is my rough observations from the paper. I'll move on to analyzing a few questions. I'll just run you through a few questions and tell you how doable they were. Now, let's look at this particular question from history. It is asking about the geographical factors towards the development of ancient India. Again, a very basic question. Where will you find fodder for this particular question or content for this particular question? There is R.S. Sharma, Ancient India by R.S. Sharma, and in R.S. Sharma, there is very first chapter, first or second chapter, I am not able to recall exactly, but it is amongst first 2-3 chapters where geographical settings as a chapter has been given, and most of the time what we do, we tend to skip that particular chapter. But if you have read that particular chapter well, you would be able to address this particular question. Now, what this question is asking, it is asking to explain the role of geographical factors towards the development of ancient India. Doable question tha, theek hai, provided you have read that fundamental part. Moving next, it is asking about the just a minute. Modern India. What was the difference between Mahatma Gandhi and Rabindranath Tagore in their approach towards education and nationalism? Fine. So there is a consistent theme of nationalism in contemporary India. At the same time, there are a lot of reforms which are taking place in the field of education. The idea of education itself is changing. In last few years, we have witnessed that particular change. And if you look at the theme in modern India, what was the difference between Mahatma Gandhi and Rabindranath Tagore in their approach towards education and nationalism? Look at this question. It is asking about difference between Mahatma Gandhi's idea and Rabindranath Tagore's idea. Now, whatever ideas were presented by Mahatma Gandhi, they were contested, right? Some of the ideas were contested by Rabindranath Tagore. Some of the ideas were contested by Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar. Some of the ideas were contested by even other philosophers of that time, right? Now, what theme I am trying to highlight in this particular part? If you look at past papers or if you look at past debates in contemporary India, you will find that there are variety of ideas regarding, maybe it is nationalism, it is education, or it is even development, right? Or overall idea of life, overall idea of nation, and there were contradictions between various thinkers or various great leaders in modern India. And UPSC has already asked a few questions on this particular line, right? So my approach ideally should be, I should prepare this part from this perspective. So whenever I am coming across any thinker, any great leader, I should be having a idea of what that particular thinker or a great leader came up with, whatever ideas that great leader provided or presented, and how it differed from the ideals of others, right? So that way I'll be having a good content. Now, this particular question was doable when? Only when you had prepared it in that way. Had you analyzed past papers, had you gone through PYQs, you would have got a sense that this type of question can be asked, right? Because there were multiple instances where you will find that contradictions or differences were asked. And typically, one person is constant here, one personality is constant, that is Mahatma Gandhi, and the other person, and these particular ideas will keep on changing. So even if you are preparing now, make sure whatever ideals we are present or ideas which were presented by Mahatma Gandhi, try to have a different perspective on those particular ideas which were presented by other great leaders. Fine. So that was about this particular question. Moving on, next is regarding socio-economic effects of introduction of railways in different countries of the world. Fine. Now, what will be the fundamental mistake one will make while answering this particular question? Fundamental mistake is you will not go beyond India, because most of the time our reading is regarding the effect of introduction of railways in India. We have good fodder, we have good content on this particular part. But the catch is what? Catch is you had to write on different countries of the world. You're not only supposed to concentrate on India. You're supposed to write regarding Africa, you are supposed to write regarding North America, maybe Australia, maybe some countries of Southeast Asia, and obviously India. And that way your answer will be complete. Now, what has happened that there is misinterpretation of this particular question under exam pressure, and in that exam pressure most of the candidates have ended up writing only on India, and that way you are not providing a complete answer. So this is the area which is unachievable in my opinion. There is nothing in this world which will prepare you on this particular question. Why I'm saying so? Now most of you will say, see that we are talking about railways and we know socio-economic effect of railways typically in India. So we can simply write this socio-economic effect for rest of the world. But that is certainly not going to create a concrete answer, right? That is not a good answer. Why I'm saying that is not a good answer? Because you should be knowing when railways were introduced in different countries. At least you should be knowing in at a chronological order, right? And in that particular way, you are also supposed to highlight some of the specificities in those various countries. You should be knowing a very specific part in this question, and that is why this question is unachievable. You might have written it, but that is not certainly a sufficient answer or a satisfactory answer, and that is why again return on investment on world history is very low. Okay, so don't even try to guess these type of questions. There is absolutely nothing you can guess these type of questions, because this is a one random question, right? And certainly you cannot guess random things. Fine. So we'll move to next question, and we are here in geography section. Now discuss the consequences of climate change on the food security in tropical countries. Understand this particular question, what it is asking. It is asking about the consequences of climate change, right? So you should be thorough with what is coming with climate change on what? On food security in tropical countries. So the fundamental part which you were supposed to know, that what is the impact of climate change in tropical areas, right? If you are clear with the impact of climate change on tropical areas, you could have been successful in addressing the issue of food security. Right now, obviously, I am not going into the details of this particular area. Detailed solution we are not discussing. We are just trying to understand these questions and from where these questions are coming and how we are supposed to approach in coming years. Now, when I see this type of question, for many candidates, it would be a easy question, right? And for many others, it would be a question where you are clueless. Why clueless? Because you might not be knowing the exact effect of climate change on tropical countries, right? And if you are not thorough with this particular part, what will happen? You will end up writing a vague answer. You will write something. Obviously, you will what you will do, what mistake you will have, you will write the consequence of climate change on food security. Fine. Your answer should look like the consequence in tropical countries, and that is where the difference lies. Okay. So again, a very specific question, I would say. Now, how to prepare for this particular question? Again, keep updated with current affairs, Keep yourself updated with contemporary issues. Fine. So effect of climate change on tropical countries has been there in news for a lot of time, right? And out of that, you need to develop understanding on the consequences part or the remedies part. Fine. So that is how you should be prepared in your notes itself. Moving further, so next question is, why is the world today confronted with the crisis of availability and access to freshwater resources? Fine. Water resources is a consistent theme for UPSC in last few years, right? If you look at the PYQs, you will find that water resources have been asked multiple times. So one important part here is you should be thorough with fact and figures, because whatever introduction you are going to provide in this particular answer, it will be regarding fact and figures, either the present resources or the current crisis. Okay, so very specific facts are required. Now if you look at the exact solution for this particular answer, it is doable, right? There is a crisis of availability, there is a crisis of access to freshwater resources. So you know that with the climate change, what is happening, whatever resources we have, they are not being replenished, pollution, so on and so forth. A lot of things could be added here. So a very easy question if you have facts and figures ready. Moving next, a very particular question on fjords. How are the fjords formed? Why do they constitute some of the most picturesque areas of the world? Okay, so maybe most of the candidates do not even know what fjords are, right? Some of the candidates would be knowing what fjords are, but they do not know how they are formed. A good number of candidates I have seen that they have a very erroneous idea on how these fjords are formed. So fjords are nothing but a outcome of past glaciation. Whatever ice ages were there, and during the ice ages, what happened, that ice sheets, they become thicker and sea level is reduced. As sea level goes down and thick ice sheets are formed, these ice sheets enter into the present day sea levels, and post the end of ice ages, what will happen, that these ice sheets will recede and sea level will come back. Now between this particular transition period, this particular fjords are formed. So when we will take up detailed discussion, I'll explain how these fjords are formed. So a brief idea I have given you in this particular part. The point is, now there will be a mad rush. Mad rush on what? Mad rush on learning each and every single landform. Right? Ideally, from prelims perspective, you should be having a good idea on each and every single landform. But now don't invest a lot of time in such areas, right? So what you are supposed to do, just prepare it well for prelims and have conceptual clarity. This particular question, what it needs, it just needs conceptual clarity, because formation of fjords, as a concept, I can put it in one line. Fine. And that one line should be thorough. I should be able to explain with the help of that one line. That is the demand. So if you end up preparing each and every single landform, you will end up wasting a lot of time. It may also happen that in next 2, 3, 4 years, such type of question is again not repeated. Now later part of this question is slightly difficult, because it is talking about why they form most of the picturesque areas of the world. If you have a fair idea, the areas in which fjords are formed, these are typically in the Arctic Circle or just around the Arctic Circle. You will find fjords, and you then have to highlight the features of that area. So that is something you are supposed to do in this particular part, right? We will discuss this in a detailed solution. Moving on, there is again one unachievable question in my opinion. It is asking about the Purvaiya, fine, easterly in the Bhojpur region. Why southwest monsoon is called as Purvaiya in Bhojpur region? This is first part. Now next part, which is even more difficult, is this. Okay, how this particular system is going to influence the cultural ethos of the region. Now why I am saying that it is difficult? maybe some of you would guess why it is called as Purvaya, since it's a Bay of Bengal branch which is entering from the east in the Bhojpur region. So that part can be addressed. But what about cultural ethos? Fine. It demands a very specific understanding of Bhojpur or the eastern parts of India, right? Now, most of you might not be even knowing what Bhojpur is or where Bhojpur is. Fine. So, if you are not from Bihar or not from northern India, it may happen that you do not know Bhojpur. Fine. And knowing cultural ethos of Bhojpur, which are an outcome of southwest monsoon, is even more difficult. Okay. So, maybe prima facie you will address this particular part. But what about the later part? Fine. So, that is the problem which is resulting into this question being a difficult question. Fine. So cultural ethos, in cultural ethos you could write about the festivals there, the food which is consumed in this particular area. There are a lot of things which can be addressed. Now there is a question from society: do you think marriage as a sacrament is losing its value in modern India? Do you think marriage as a sacrament is losing its value in modern India? Again, if you look at the contemporary debates in India, there are a lot of debates on marriages, right? There are issues of delayed marriages, there are issues of divorces, which is on rise, and then there are also issues of people not marrying, right? So even in demographic context, whenever we, from geography, like I teach geography, and even in geography, we have to address this particular part because the institution of marriage, if it is not well in place, it has a demographic consequence, right? So there is a debate around this demographic issue, and there is a debate on contemporary issues in marriages, and from that perspective this particular question was asked, right? So you had to address if it is losing sacrament, and if it is losing sacrament, why it is losing sacrament, and what could be done for that matter. Fine. So that is something you need to address in this question. Contemporary, fairly contemporary. Again, next question: suicide among young women is increasing in Indian society. What this particular question demanded? This demanded a good hold on fact, because to highlight this particular part that suicide among young women is increasing, you need to present some data, typically from NCRB. And in that NCRB suicide data, you will find that what is the proportion of women who are committing suicide as compared to men, and that is how you can establish this first part. And you were supposed to also address why this is happening. And doing this particular part, you need to be very sensitive as well, because we are highlighting the issues of young women, and it should also reflect some amount of sensitivity. Do not write anything crap, right? Now most of the candidate, they would err in this particular question, and they might end up blaming the person who is committing suicide, and that is a huge mistake. You certainly cannot write something on that lines. So refrain from those particular areas, and be sensitive. You should be sensitive in answering this particular question. Whatever you argue, provide it with facts and figures, right? So no opinion is going to help you in this particular answer. Next is again fairly current and contemporary, that is child cuddling is now being replaced by mobile phones, right? We see this particular part every here and there. Now what is being asked? Discuss its impact on socialization of children. Very, very specific. Here it gets very specific. This is what our general observation is. But what question is asking? It is asking about the socialization of children. The mistake while answering will be, you would have highlighted the problems of mobile phones, right? Which is affecting the children. Now, if you have done that, certainly there would be an error in your answer. But again, there was a very limited fodder to address the demands of this particular question, because most of us will not be able to how this replacement of mobile phone is affecting socialization of children. Why we do not know this particular part? Because most of the time, whatever angle we see the mobile phone or children holding mobile phone, we see that it may affect their growth, right? We do not see it from the perspective of socialization, and that is somewhere we lack fodder as well. So that was section A. Moving on to section B. In section B, again, fairly basic question. Again, I have said initially also history, there were very basic questions, but demanded certainly some amount of specificity. So what are the main features of Vedic society and religion? Do you think some of the features are still prevailing in Indian society? Static material was required. We all have read about Vedic society and Vedic religion. You just had to recollect all those facts. You have read it for prelims. I hope you had revised it for mains, and just compare with the present day society. Okay. So first part is static, another part is analytical. That's it. Further, what were the major technological changes introduced during the Sultanate period? How did those technological changes influence Indian society? Again, in this particular question, there are two parts. First part is easy if you have good hold on static part. Okay. Sultanate period ended in 1526, started somewhere in 11th century. Now, there were a lot of technological changes took place in this particular period, because the Turks or all the other invaders from the northwest, they came up with a superior technology, right? And that is the fundamental reason they were able to have a stronghold on India. Now, it is available in basic reading material. It's not a big deal. What is the big deal? How did those technological changes influence the Indian society? And this part, again, you should be aware of these particular specificities. This is very specific. Most of us do not know what exactly changed in Indian society as a result of technology. So Indian society changed culturally. It has changed economically. Fine. A lot of changes took place as a result of technology, including the political changes. So identify those cultural changes, economic changes, political changes. That should be sufficient in this particular part. Next, how did the colonial rule affect the tribals in India, and what was the tribal response to the colonial operations? Again, basic question. Fine. If you are done with the early modern history, be it from prelims perspective, you should be able to answer this particular part. So we know a lot of hostilities were there between Britishers and tribals, because the relation of tribals with their land, with their forest, with their natural resources, it changed because of Britishers. So that was the first part of the question. What about the later part? How did tribal response to the colonial operations? There are a lot of tribal revolts you need to mention in this particular area. Now, this has been a consistent debate in contemporary India. A lot of new evidences are emerging, or new historical facts are emerging regarding tribal revolts which took place in various parts of India, and fairly in that context we find this particular question. Further, we move on to geography again. Comment on the resource potential of the long coastline of India. Highlight the status of natural hazard preparedness in these areas. Very specific. Both parts are not as interrelated. If you look at the first part, it is talking about resources. If you talk about later part, natural hazard preparedness, I can call this as GS paper 3 ka disaster management. Okay. So the line between GS1 and GS3 has been blurred long ago. So at least the part of environment, disaster management, it is interchangeable. Sometimes it will be asked in paper 1, sometimes it will be asked in paper 3. Now, for the first part, we have to comment on the resource potential. Fine. So you have to address abiotic potential or abiotic resource potential and biotic resource potential. Make these two categories and then put your data. Okay. Also this will demand a command over facts. So you should be thorough with the facts regarding the resources of India. Now look at the later part, the status of natural hazard preparedness. Very specific demand in this question. You should be aware what natural hazards will affect this coastline and what are the specific initiatives which have been taken by the government, and with the help of those specific initiatives you will be able to address the status of natural hazard preparedness. Fine. So you are supposed to address this part, status. You are not only going to address ki natural hazard preparedness kya kya hai. That is not the only part. What is the status? Current status needs to be reflected. Now this particular part can also be elucidated with the help of some examples, with the help of some case studies. To give you an idea, let's take example of like cyclones. A lot of cyclones have affected maybe eastern coast of India and western coast of India, right? And if we compare the effect of these cyclones vis-a-vis the effect 20 or 30 years ago, there has been a drastic change, right? So our preparedness regarding the natural hazards is manifold, right? So on those lines you are supposed to address this particular question. Moving next, identify and discuss the factors responsible for diversity of natural vegetation in India. Basic question. Most of you again do not read this particular part, that is of natural vegetation. Basically there are only 2-3 factors you need to address. These needed to be addressed. Climate is there, soil is there, altitude is there, okay, topography is there. So all these, if you address that particular part well, you also need to provide the diversity of natural vegetation with the help of map. So you have to provide what type of forest or what type of natural vegetation India has. That is first part. What second part is asking, and why this second part has been asked. Now read the second part. Assess the significance of wildlife sanctuaries in rainforest regions of India. Very specific question. Fine. So you need to know why this question was asked. Now where we find rainforest in India? Western coastal parts of India and northeastern parts of India. If you go to this particular area, what is happening? There is a rapid ecological change which is taking place due to anthropogenic activities such as development in coastal area or in northeastern area, because there is a lot of public infrastructure which is coming in. Some agricultural practices are there. So that is the contemporary issue for this particular question, and that is why then wildlife sanctuary as a method of conservation becomes very important. So that was the angle from which this particular question was asked. Next, this is a classic geography optional question, I would say. I'll also tell you where I can relate this particular part in geography optional. So question is reading, why did human development fail to keep pace with economic development in India? Right? So it is asking about human development which is not at par with the economic development. You needed some fact on economic development like GDP growth and all. You also needed some fact on human development. You could mention that the rank of human development, the rank of India in human development index and all, and then provide reasons. Okay. So this is a debate in geography that is regarding environmental determinism, right? Which suggests that it is the environment or your surrounding which determines your development or whatever progress mankind makes. If you look at India, again, human development is not there. Let's talk about health, the kind of environment or kind of climate we have. It is not best type of climate, right? There are like extremes of climate in various parts of India. There is, as a result of India's climate, there is a high level of disease prevalence, and all this is hampering human development. That this is just a glimpse I'm providing you. In detailed answer, I'll make you run through the details of all these aspects. Now, was that achievable in the exam hall pressure? Absolutely not. Right? Recollecting, sitting outside exam hall and recollecting all these issues relating various aspects of geography and human development is very easy. But in the exam hall pressure, this was absolutely not possible. Maybe you have written some or the other part, that would be a very vague answer. You were supposed to be very specific on how various geographical conditions in India is affecting the human development. Fine. So that was something which was asked in this particular question. Moving next, from being net food importer in 1960s, India has emerged as a net food exporter to the world. Provide reasons. Fine. Simple. It is taking you to green revolution. Fine. So agriculture is again a contemporary theme in India. Be it productivity in agriculture or associated issues such as PDS, MSP, all these are contemporary issues. And in those particular area, we have learned that we are now a net food exporter of the world, because there is good production of various cereals and other food crops. So that is something you are supposed to provide in this area. Next, does urbanization lead to more segregation and marginalization of the poor in Indian metropolis? Again, contemporary issue, be it Indian geography or Indian society. You can club this particular part very well. There was a lot of fodder available in static part also, because it is nothing but urbanization and impact of urbanization on the poor in India. Okay, so whenever you prepare urbanization in itself, you would be prepared with this particular part. So nothing fancy here. Why is caste identity in India both fluid and static? Very interesting question. Again, just have contemporary observation, right? Caste is there, but does that matter as it used to matter maybe 20-30 years ago? No, obviously the answer is no. Go in any part of India, caste is present, right? Maybe various parts of our life we have caste as a part of life, but it is not making our lives as rigid as it used to make maybe 2-3 decades ago, and that is why this particular question has been set, right? So contemporary India, or whatever features we have in contemporary India, we have this particular question on that angle. Fine. So let's have last question. Discuss the impact of post-liberal economy on the ethnic and communalism. Ethnicity, ethnic identity, and communalism. Again, a slight touch of optional you will find. थोड़ा सा sociology optional का touch आपको यहाँ पे दिखाई देगा. So it is talking about post-liberal economy. Okay. So you need to understand what changes have taken place in post-liberal economy, or globalization and all we call it. So in the post-liberal economy or the era of globalization, we have seen that this ethnic identity, it has changed, be it India or across the globe. There are many changes. Also in the ideals of communalism, we have found a lot of changes, and you had to provide why globalization has led to these two changes. So that was about this particular question. A fairly doable question, I would say. Nothing fancy. Most of the core content was anyway available in your static notes. You just had to substantiate well with the help of contemporary examples. So we'll have all this discussion in our detailed solution or detailed answer key. So this was the just a brief introduction to the GS paper 1 question paper. In next session, we'll meet you once again with subject wise analysis and solution or detailed solution for each and every question. So see you again. Good day.